Okay. I wrote a book about a group of friends surviving a crisis, and then the book became my life. I named it once I realized this was happening, once I saw that I was writing on the previous day the script of the subsequent day in terms of who I saw and what I thought as I moved through the city. Once I saw this, I named the book and made it so that the life I was writing was also the life I had lived. It wouldn't just go one way. It wouldn't just be that I was living what I had written. I had to live in order to write, and I had to meet my friends and receive their writing in order to write. And they needed to see me write in order to go on writing. And we all needed to sit in that cafe and wait out this crisis that was taking away all the other writers, and not just the writers, but also the bus drivers and fellow students and the people who rode the trains and the audiences for our readings. I named the book that had become my life after the events of my life so that there would be no distinction. There was no distinction in my living. There was no break between days. You went to sleep, your body rested, but nothing changed. You woke into the same circling terrain of the city, the same buildings wandering and knocking into each other and knocking houses down, but nothing falling and no plaster coming off, just waddling and knocking and stomping buildings, looking all the time normal, but being absolutely unconventional in form. So these are discrete texts about writing and invisibilities and architectures and people. And this one is called Untitled Euclidean, and it begins with a line from, or it takes a few words from Euclid's Principles of Geometry, which is quite beautiful, if you want to check that out. It's the Oliver Byrne edition that has these incredible drawings that go with it, that's supposed to facilitate your understanding the theories. So this is from Euclid. If magnitude taken separately be proportionals. So, Untitled Euclidean. If magnitude taken separately be proportionals, be shapes of light, be events dividing along the lines of inside and outside, and faces turning to and away from light, the round of the ceiling being the frame for looking back at the day, and you've divided your day into the left and right rounds of the dome structure, and have thought in one and fucked in the other, and are now sitting along the line between looking up at the sheltered day, and are now sitting along the line between looking up at the sheltered day, you being sheltered, we. And somebody let sound enter from the street. We're trying to build something whole but intricate. The voices be proportional to the throats from which they're emitted. She's trying to find the black voices. And the door closes and makes another line and gives another opportunity to stand, to fuck, to think, to study the partitions of light that block the sky, your blue, your magenta, like we're all living according to the spectrum. These will be your events. But every time the door opens, the dome shifts, more people enter. Voices take the interior of the space and turn the whole thing into volume. They bring in stories from outside, make the shape you're living radial. Are you picking up what we're putting down gets left, a gift to the form, while the constant of bodies squeezing into the interior, time separating from structures becomes a throng. This is dome living. People be proportionals to your thinking, to your wondering where she, be proportionals to your thinking, to your wondering where she is within the throng, and wondering about the portions of light discernible to the eye. Are they in any kind of order? And she'll be in the part of the dome you can't feel from within the dome. Somebody comes and tells you, look up, be proportional to the wall expanding in the third round of the dome. Be the magnitude of the first and the second round. Be where the line empties out. Be the third round that holds the books and protects the books from light. We be dark in the third round, reading under soft light and taken separately, each in our own study, swept up in the histories of things, how many times. And the voices work against the skin, make you want people to draw closer, make you want some unified living. To think within some magnitude of a black voice unfolding and running through every other possible voice, so that there is always something breaking, something ready, and something moving to something stilled, and a third shape growing from the memories of other voices. And this is where the light is most intense, you in your orange, your brown. You won't know this, but that piece was commissioned to go with an artist who did these series of architectural sculptures, like these really small models of certain houses. These are actual real houses. And I picked this particular house, which I think was a kind of utopian experiment in Colorado or Utah or something. And then just went crazy. This is a untitled essay. I had written somewhere about the invisible, that there was a way inside of it, and arriving there could happen through music, or could happen by virtue of aligning a certain kind of breathing to a certain kind of sight. But in saying what I said about the invisible, I also had to be honest that I had never seen it fully. I only caught glimpses of it in the moments between playing one side of a record and the other side. Invisibility had to do with music, and this was how I'd start talking about it, even though what I said before had to do with houses, and houses are not music, although music is architectural. But at the same time, Nina Simone was playing Bye Bye Blackbird on the piano and hadn't yet said any words. Minutes had gone by, but because this was Nina, at any moment you expected her to begin singing, or to yell, or to shout something like, "Ah-ba-ba," and for the song to end, leaving you with the feeling of a life having been written over you. The song ended, there were never any words, so we met it with breath. We were all of a sudden in one of those houses where the people who live in them need to breathe a certain way so as to navigate them. You did a thing to get to the kitchen, to descend the stairs to the outside door. We'd followed a map and arrived and didn't know how to move around the house because we didn't yet know how to breathe. Breath was the drawing out of lines, and you first had to convince yourself that drawing lines was your right and you could do it anywhere. And some people might clap as you did this. They're being so excited to see your breath on paper. But you didn't have to be startled by their noise erupting in the space, because in this case, the clapping made rooms open. And when the space got larger, you stopped everyone to ask if they saw what you were seeing, which was a space on one hand, yet on the other hand was a black woman playing piano and playing it unlike anybody else, drawing her own interiority, trying to make the room larger and bring the audience nearer, but protecting herself as well. I was in a light-filled space, and this was architecture, and we were a drawing, and music rained down and sort of streamed through the rooms. And one ever-widening line becoming a sea somewhere off the page, beyond the windows. Listening was like pulling blue houses out of the water and settling them down in this big house, which simply grew larger to accommodate these strange architectures. House-like, but porous feeling, too, elastic. You were a house inside another house, and all of this was caught up in some kind of climate that was invisible to whatever was outside of it. I didn't know how we could know of an outside from where we were, inside the thing that couldn't be seen. But everyone seemed convinced that this was the case. We were invisible, we couldn't be seen. But nor could the thing outside of us be seen. And somebody turns the album over. She talks a little and plays the piano as the timbre of her voice shakes your house, the house that's your body. And soon there is just piano and later only singing. Her singing sometimes makes you clap, and a crescendo carries you someplace not on the map you've been harboring. You make a line and walk away from it for the day, then come back to the next day and make a new line directly under the previous one. But it's not a drawn line, it's a written one, drawn. Time is telling you something about where you are, the hands flipping the disc in a space that is alive with houses you can't see but which leave maps in their place. I put my hands through the maps and flip the album, then Flomila plays, and listening was like drawing something over and over again, like a small circle with another circle overlapping it until you've got a sheet of circles almost illegible in their smallness that become dots at points, and you're looking, and every once in a while, letters. Sorry, I'm having a hard time seeing my pages. So I'm going to conclude with a slightly longer piece. This is called Untitled Environments, and it was, I read this one a lot because it also comforts me. And I'm finding in my sort of approaching old ageness that there are just certain things that I just really love that sort of do something for me when I put them out in the world, and then I feel like I don't want to leave them behind. So this is a piece that I think of in a way as a kind of gift, although usually the people who are named in this piece are not in the room, but sometimes they are. So this was written for an issue on feminisms, and I felt like I didn't necessarily have anything to say specifically about that, but wanted to name some names. And also, every writing is an excuse to talk about drawing, so there we go. No, it's, oh, here we go. But does that blind you guys? Okay. This is also new, this part where like you can't look up and down at the same time. Untitled Environments. I began the day wanting to bring into convergence 3 activities of being: what I'd seen, what I'd read, and what I'd drawn, and to say about these acts how they made lines in the world that ran alongside other lines, and how these lines together made environments of the earth where I could put my body and you could put yours. And these would be lines always entwined because there was little, if anything, you could say or make without calling forth other lines. And this was how you knew where you were. This is how you knew you were where you were, and the ground was worth cultivating, and that there was life beneath the ground. I spent a long time looking into each of the acts of how I'd been in the world, how I'd conveyed that I'd been there, and I found all these overlapping currents, and found that each of the acts divided into further acts, like the acts of writing and making narrative, which divided into acts of building and afforestation, which then led to sex and led to reading and wandering. I had found in drawing a way to think about narrative such that I could look into narrative without writing narrative, and could see something about what it did, and I didn't have to place periods anywhere, didn't have to give details or unfold events, but could be in a narrative space, a space being built by narrative. And I could say this was happening because I was moving my hand across a page, and I had a pen in my hand. I had a pen in my hand, and for a long time, or a short time, I'd move it across the page and think or not think about narrative, what it meant to be in narrative, to feel narrative gather in my body, and feel it work to move out of my body. But I'd be making a drawing, and yet as I drew, I was often conscious of the resemblance of the drawing, of the lines of that drawing to those I made when I was writing. The resemblance was the sun at the bottom of the drawing page. I was trying to invert a city to suggest a dense landscape, and the presence of this sun kept me cognizant that all the time I was drawing, I was doing a kind of writing that in its duration was drawing, in its shape was writing, and narrative pulsed at the course of all of this, at the core of all of this. The ink was the core of narrative, my hand was the core, the shape my hand made was the core, and I knew when I was saying narrative that I wasn't limiting it to some event happening inside fiction, but rather was trying to get at an energy, a light that threaded all of my acts of reading and writing and drawing and seeing into a day, then days. I have found in writing that all the women I'd read, that some of these women had pulled a line out of some moment of doing and drew that line and kept drawing it while events and time settled above it. And this line was its own kind of core and began something like, "This land will not always be foreign, Audre Lorde, appearing to dream." And the line became the same as the land when you looked at it from far off, from deep inside something that flooded and was peopled, often called a poem, sometimes a march of bodies and protests, sometimes the single body working at a desk, standing in for every other body at risk, looking out of its face, perceiving. And Nasreen Mohammadi, her body failing, but sustaining this practice of laying lines, writing into her own drawing, the shadow came and stood in its place like yesterday. And the early drawings of Julie Moretu were all at once the lines in the world head for the periphery, and each departure is violent, and each exploding site is a center with a micro-architecture inside that pulses like all centers pulse, responding to the megastructures of the previous layers. Each center being a book burning at the core of the earth. Janice Lee's single moment during the darkness that opened the morning of my writing, where I could see the histories of the words I was combining, could see the ground they covered, could hear them resonating in the material of that writing, the sounds coming off the dark in their faces, the languages having to break in order for these words to appear, to flow like they're searching for something illuminated from within. Janice's figure kneeling in the alleyway between worlds. Danielle Vogel's harvesting of water from mouth to ink. Simran Gill's becoming invisible like wind. We were suspended in time, still talking to Virginia Woolf, still searching for Zora Neale Hurston, wanting to empty Woolf's words of their racism, wanting to be loved by Stein. I have been up all night writing. I have been reading all my life and shaped in my writing these places where lines had been laid out and were woven in with the earth. I began drawing what I read and saw Mira Schindler's oily architectures and saw Gagel's knots and found in Agnes Martin a picture of our breathing and stood in awe of Toba Kaduri's endless windows. Each artist nesting a book in the floor, always a book inside some other. It was an interlocking thing, ley lines illuminated, seen only in the dark of writing. The line drawn out of the body through time, wanting to have been loved by Stein, wishing for Zora to have been better loved. These were the pages that settled in you when you were drawing what you'd written for such a long time. I had found in drawing that I was writing something I'd been reading, Meme Bersenbrugge's awareness of the horizon, the breath, and the mesa. I'll wait to see what I recognize, staring into the light. I was looking into the moss growing between the bricks laid out in front of the door, looking into the moss as its own space, its doing beyond making a border, and the green coming back after such a long winter, bright but also morning, the sun bearing down on it, the clouds blocking the sun, the human eyes glaring, and found within spaces that bordered some infinite writing, and found within spaces that bordered some infinite writing about process and thought, some unending burrowing, some endless death and reach, some constant holding in place. Kristen Prevellay's The Poem is a state both of mind and landscape. In our books burrowing inside our drawings, the lines holding the brick unyielding. I had found in my looking at the land that I was also looking at water. Behind me were living architectures in which I wrote and drew, and where I read about other people's writing and drawing, their mercurial habitations. Natalie Sarraud's dark clusters between the dead house fronts, motionless little knots giving rise to occasional eddies, slight cloggings. Eileen Miles's standing with several hundred people, their identities changing slightly, then utterly in the course of the night. Mary Shevitz's days go by when I do nothing but underline the damp edge of myself. And these were all moments of being that became houses, or the stories of houses. And this was something pooling beneath the earth, altering its body, inverting surfaces. You did your farming in your sleep. You unwrote the clothes you wore. And I have found in reading a way to draw lines from the earth and make an outline around my sitting at this table or walking the streets of any place, any large or small city, any countryside, any emptied, forgotten place, any place transitioning, taking on multiple identities, blaring them all at once. And this was all architecture, all the reading I had done. Lynn Haginian's The Open Mouths of People, her weather and air drawn to us. To say landscape is a moment in time. I found in my walking the expanse of several places through which I stopped repeatedly. I stopped in time and without time. I stood at the threshold of doors, at the throat of caves. I pulled windows from collapsed walls and grabbed a book to hold up the city, the barn, the balcony, and this was reading. I had already written toward Edie Fake's architectures. I had counted the Ruth Asawa sculptures hanging above me and quoted Monica Grismala 3 times. Ava Hess's catalog raisonné of drawings, where was it? Lee Bonkeque, Zarina. Zarina had said, once I lived in a house of many rooms, and this was an etching, reading aggregated layers with luminous lines running between, and each line was a moment in someone, where the body stood up and walked into a book, a drawing, a squat structure of doors, a tower perched on a hill into the water, and each line was the writing back of language, its response.